Okay, I'm going to keep talking about Elizabeth Holmes and her company Theranos. And like I talked about before, Theranos was about using a machine that she invented. She started this about 2003, although she had been planning it probably before that. She dropped out of Stanford to pursue her company entrepreneurship dream. She chose the name Theranos because it's supposed to be therapy plus diagnosis. So, like, the two halves of those words. And her whole plan was she wanted to revolutionize how blood tests are taken, how people receive their medical diagnoses, make it faster, easier, and cheaper to get multiple results without having to send all these tubes of blood to all these different locations and labs to process them. She claimed that she had this device that she was creating, that this is how she was getting all these huge big investors giving her millions of dollars. And then the more investors she got on board that had really high status and were incredibly well known, the more other ones came on board. So it was kind of like a snowball effect. It's like all she had to do is get the first few massive donations, and then she just had to, I guess, fill in the blanks with what she promised. She nicknamed her device the Edison as kind of a joke, like, because she's this incredibly, like, large ego, like, kind of mind-boggling. After sitting Madoff, maybe it's a little bit less than Madoff, but really, really astounding. And I did look into the history of her family. Apparently, back in history, her family had come from a bloodline of people who had money, old money, and even though her family was successful and they had, nice things, and they had material goods and the means to keep getting more, it was kind of like put in her mind at a very young age. I think her dad or her mom, I'm not sure which one, was extremely, like, overbearing in that they wanted perfectionism. They wanted their children to be, like, even better than what they, like, it had to be, go for it. They wanted them to want more, to want to become more, make more, whatever their natural gifts or education produced. They kind of were living, honestly, on more like a scarcity tactic. Is that scarcity mindset, that what they had wasn't enough, and that it was up to them to make the circumstances to create that, what they felt. See, again, it's like the inflated egos, what they felt they were worth. Like, she has a very, like, demeanor of somebody who believes she's all that, believes that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like, the problem is she puts, when you're watching all these talks she gives, and I mean, there's a plethora of lectures of her in front of incredibly famous people, giving these motivating speeches about her company and what they're doing. The problem is really in that she spent, because she's such a good networker, such a good, I don't know, she's a good people person, but she presents very well. She's, she has the all-American look or whatever, and she was younger and very motivated, like times 1,000. Like, she at one point was like, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids, I just want to devote my life to Theranos, and the problem is she was more interested in building up the image and sort of drawing in the funds, which of course is important, but it's like less was put into the actual product and making it a reality, something that actually worked, something that kept fulfilling or rising to fulfill what she claimed it could do. And what many people kind of in the science community were like, I don't know about that. Like there were definitely people who were hesitant, who were, in that field. But she did end up hiring a lot of those people. The weird thing is she did not put a single scientific person or scientist on her famous Theranos board of directors. So there really wasn't anybody who could, they were all business people. There was really nobody who could point out the science part of it, like back up and, stand up for the actual machine itself and give adequate updates. And she was so busy doing her PR machine that she wasn't doing that. And she had this habit of, when the people, like the whistleblowers that ended up breaking this scandal, which they even called it a cult. They said working there was like living in a cult because of the extreme secrecy and the bizarre lack of transparency. Like the room that they would all use to work on the devices themselves, it was basically always locked. Or, if there were tours or anything, that part, instead of being, you would think that would be where you would want people to go first, is to see, the sort of the chamber of where everything happens, like the creation area. But that was exactly what they were trying to cordon off, because I guess they must have known that they were seriously not meeting the criteria whatsoever, but they just kept increasingly, and I'm saying they because she was, she had somebody in charge that she was actually sleeping with for like 11 years, and he gave her at some point a $13 million loan, personal loan. Okay. But, like, I don't know how you're going to pay that back. But, oh, God, his name. Batswami. Sunny Batswami. I'd probably not get that exactly right. But he is 20 years older than her. She met him when she was in Beijing, when she was 19, after she had left Stanford. And that's how she really got her first, well, not her first, she actually was a family member, gave her $1 million to start. And then when that ran out, he gave her this other loan. And then I guess in transactional mode, then she let him basically be running the whole show, kind of the sciencey part of it, or just be in charge of those people. But the problem was, he, first of all, he was a total jerk and very cold and a bully, like really aggressive, very demeaning. He really treated people in a demeaning manner. And he was very into stonewalling and shutting down any kind of interaction. Like, all the people who worked together had to sign these huge contracts saying they weren't allowed to talk to each other about a lot of the things they were working on, which of course it's like, well, how are you supposed to build something if nobody can talk to each other about the parts that are being put together? It doesn't really make any sense. And that, like I said, the whole place was locked up so well that there were so many parts of the actual building. Well, this is very much just like Madoff, to be honest with you, because Madoff had an entire floor of his building, his trade building, with his business, with his sons and brother, and all his employees. They were all on a certain part of the building, and then there was a 17th floor which no one was allowed to go to or have anything to do with, and that was actually the floor where he committed all the crimes, like manufacturing all the false statements. I guess he had a bunch of people working for him on a crooked level, I guess, because I don't see how these people would have been like in a regular business flow, because they were con artists. But the point is, at one point his sons found out about the 17th floor, and because he was constantly going up there and then disappearing for hours and hours, and they were just like, well, what the heck is going on? And they felt like, since they were huge heads of the department, that they should know what that was about. And it's like, if anyone asked about that, he would just be so rude, so cold. He would shut people down. He would, almost belittle his own family just to get them off his back. Like, he would not budge on that whatsoever. And so kind of with Theranos, it's the same thing. It's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. So it's like they have a private area where they're basically hiding things that are going wrong. And then they have an area where they're looking like they're doing a ton of work. And people would oftentimes, they had to be constantly be replaced because people had to stay for overtime and do all this crazy stuff, because they weren't getting the stats, they weren't giving the results that they were promising. And so they would work everybody to death because they needed more data, and because the data that they were getting, it wasn't adding up. So they kind of had this idea, which is crooked, kind of like, let's just work harder, not smarter. So it's like they just kept burning the midnight oil and doing the same thing over and over and over again, even though it kept not producing results that worked, because the product didn't work. So, and what they were doing is, when they had studies or, fake studies or whatever, and they're coming up with all this data, and they were actually sending out the blood tests to other labs. Okay, so they're sending out the blood tests, then getting them back, and then lying and saying that the machine did it, and they weren't sent out. Okay, but the people who are actively in charge of the machine working are the ones who are being asked to cover it up and not tell the truth, but it's done in a really coercive, weird way. It's very, very manipulative, and again, it's just this constant confusion. Like, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Sorry, I'm trying to open up my notes. And I can't fucking see it. Okay, so all that's going on. As far as Elizabeth herself, I tried to really look into like what kind of personality disorder or mental illness, or what are the mechanics of her mind, because this went on for this is what blew my mind about all this financial deception, these Ponzi schemes and different con artists, lawyers who are con artists type stuff that I was looking up. You know, I'm not talking about like street level grifters. I'm talking about like, these are all people with big money, big status, you know, and they're affecting an amazing amount of people, like a vast amount of people. And with Theranos, it's really scary because people are actually getting the wrong results there was a whole thing about syphilis testing, like people were getting wrong results for that's kind of an important test, right? And then like people with cancer, you know, getting the wrong information, like told that they're, you know, not in remission anymore, but that was like not true. You know, I mean, just outrageous, like life-changing things affecting so many innocent people. And really, what I was trying to do is try to understand, like, what the heck is going on with her. She's not the warmest person, I'll say that. She is extremely engaging, interesting, fascinating. She does pump you up when you listen to her. That is all true. Like, she is very motivating. It's just, for me, this sort of, I don't know, like maybe like some kind of personal touch is really missing. She's very didactic. She's very strategic. She's very slogany, almost. Like, she'll take like sayings that, like, you know, not that I don't like a good quote, but it's like she'll take these sort of abstract success quotes, you know, that are, you know, that, you know, have been said before, and then, you know, she'll wrap it around her particular brand and then sort of regurgitate it in this like kind of I don't know what you want to call it, like hype speak, where it does sound very believable. But once again, there's definitely something missing to me in her messaging, where I don't find her to be terribly focused on personal, like, stories about personal people. It's always just more a concepts. And if she does bring in stories about other people, they do seem a little staged. And you know, she definitely sets up how she does things a certain way, and then I think she just sort of goes off her own personality, which is, like I said, kind of vivacious. But she clearly is a huge fan of pathological lying, and grandiose narcissism probably comes to mind, and making an impression. Like, I really felt like, and this is very true of Melissa Caddick, who's the next one I'm going to talk about. She's Australian. She was a finance person who ran a Ponzi scheme. What a Ponzi scheme is basically like what you would call robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? So it's like you're asking for money from people so that you can grow their money, but then you're actually not growing it. Like, okay, you're spending the majority of it you're spending for your own personal means, and then the rest of it you're using as collateral to pull in new people, and then when you get the new people, you use the new people's money to pay off the older people who are asking for some of their money back at different points, because people always take out, if people are playing the market or people are investing money, there's always something in someone's life where it's like, okay, well, I need that to, like there's like a family crisis, or like, we're going on some big trip, or, like there's something major going on, buying a house. There's something where it's like we need to take a portion of our own money, and the money, you have to have money to give them. You can't just be like, oh, it's not here anymore. So what they would be doing is essentially giving the people someone else's money, and literally there was no actual growing of the original funds. It's just a shell game. They're just moving around the same money, new and old, and then constantly flipping it. And that's all well and good if you always have new people coming in and investing, which at the height of Madoff, at the height of Elizabeth Holmes, they were so freaking successful. She was a billionaire. So was he. They were flush with money at many times. But what would happen is when they were at those points, they would get greedy. They would get very complacent, very like, because these things went on forever. Like her thing went on from I think 2003 to 2015. Madoff's went on for 2 decades. Try to wrap your mind around that. 20 years. And because he was the chairman of NASDAQ at one point, and he was revered, and he had done some things in the financial Wall Street world, which is of course known not for its ethics, or it's known for not having things in place. Well, they do have supervision in place, but because of different political changes, and greed and different things going on in the world, at any given time, those supervisions will be lessened or heightened. And for the most part, they were lessened until, the housing crisis of 2008, where everything just went to fucking hell. And there was no, everybody lost so much money, and there was no money to move around and fit here and there and play with to cover up anything, because everybody in America was losing extreme amounts of wealth and losing everything, and because everything was crooked. So there's a guy named, oh my gosh, let me get his name right, Marcolis, and can't remember his first name for some unknown reason. Mark Stenopolis? I'm saying it wrong. He's got a really long Greek name. I'll put it in my Threads account. Famous guy, because he basically went to the higher ups of the financial, hierarchy, and 5 times in a period maybe of 6 years, something like that, 4 years, where he kept doing reports and generating reports showing them that the Madoff was a fraud, or doing some, either he was doing insider trading, or he had a Ponzi scheme. And like, literally, because of who Madoff was in the financial world, how renowned he was, and how everybody was fearful of confronting him, and also everybody just, he was like the king of Wall Street. Everybody looked up to him so much. It was almost like, a star or a celebrity, more than a celebrity, like a hero, and it was like nobody wanted to be the one to question him or get on his bad side because he was so powerful. And it's like, one would worry about your reputation or career if you challenge someone that critical, right? To be like going in Hollywood to like the head of MGM or something, and questioning their validity as of their job or what they do. And it's like, that's never gonna go well, and it's gonna be a huge gossip mill. Like, literally everyone's gonna find out about it. So it's like nobody wants to be step out online and have a major confrontation with somebody who is supposed to be a hero in that field, So nobody did anything. Like, they didn't even run the numbers. And Mark Stephanopoulos, that's his name, what he ended up doing, which is kind of shocking, and it was in that movie, oh my gosh, what that movie with Christian Bale was in it, something about money and short something, Moneyball. No, it's not Moneyball. It's another, The Big Short. That's it, Big Short, and it's based on a book too. And basically, what he did, Mark Stephanopoulos did, is they asked him. They said, "Well, how did you figure out that this was not legitimate? That he was running a Ponzi scheme. Because a Ponzi scheme is pretty. That's like really big time. That's not like a small carnivorous type of thing. That's like on a massive scale. It's almost impossible to pull something like that off." And he literally is quoted saying, and he's had a million interviews about this, saying that he knew it within 5 minutes of just doing looking at the data. And then he said it took him about 4 hours after he looked at the data to run the numbers and construct it with evidence for what he believed was happening. But his whole premise was this: the market goes up and down. It's always fluctuating. People win money, lose money. It's always, and even when everybody's winning for a while and there's a streak, I think they call that bull bear. I don't know all this stuff, but it always is going to still have slight fluctuations. Like, there's never going to be a time where it's not a flat line, it's not a steady increasing line either, and that's what Madoff was a master of, was he would have consistent returns. I think it was like 1%, and over the year it would be like maybe 10%, but of steady increase of making, an increase in what you invested. But they were never dramatic. And like, some of his clients were like former financial people in the business. And even they were like, well, if it had been like 20% or, even, closer to 50, like that would be like a huge red flag. I mean, that would be obviously something wrong. But they were like, it's 10%, like maybe he's just really clever. I mean, he is like the king of Wall Street. Maybe he can do things that most people couldn't do. And that's really what everybody was banking on, was his huge reputation. And he really, as a grandiose narcissist, he really laid it on thick with all the big financial bigwigs, he was always praising them and complimenting them and flattering them. Like, he was very, like, he would, what do they say, grease the wheels. He would always do that. And so, of course, everybody liked that, and they liked being praised by him. And so he created, in a way, this sort of bubble around him where it's like a little impenetrable, because he's giving people, ego boosts, while he's also clearly being shown as a front runner in things other people would even dream of accomplishing. So it's like, who's going to question him? But with her, what it ended up being is the machine just didn't work. And as time went on, running the deception became increasingly harder, and people just wanted results that were valid and consistent, and they were putting so much pressure on their employees to produce something that they knew was not legitimate. And she had this sort of, I don't know what's going on with her, where she had this kind of idea where it's like she had just she was just obsessed with being successful, obsessed with being like the next Steve Jobs, really tied into her image, which actually Melissa Caddick and Madoff all were like this. In fact, Madoff, when he was caught, like, he wrote like a one-line note to his like son and daughter-in-law. It was just kind of like, sorry or something, and he didn't even say love dad or like nothing. It was just like a very much like one-line apology for what he was ruining everybody's lives, and now the sons are being questioned, like, were they part of it? And that never went away. One of them committed suicide after 2 years of going through that. The second one ended up getting cancer and dying after 3 years, really from the stress of all of it. I mean, I'm not saying definitively, but one can imagine if you're under that kind of intense media scrutiny for that long, and everybody you've ever dealt with your career, and you're a family man and you have all these responsibilities, is everybody doesn't trust you anymore. Like, how are you supposed to make any money to make any of this right? Like, you can't. And the fact that Madoff, I mean, the grossest part to me is that Elsie Weil, I'm saying his name wrong, he wrote Night, the famous Holocaust book. His foundation that he had built for survivors and their families, the legacy that he was leaving for the Jewish community, like that, it was like $52 million or something insane, all wiped out, gone. Like, all these charities were, and the thing with Madoff is he would really go after his own community, because that's where he felt like he had the most influence. So, like, the country club, Jewish country clubs, like anywhere, he really would push those groups. And he would do this thing where he would act like it was an exclusive access. So now, like, in terms of what was the reaction when this happened, when they lost it? I mean, of course, they lost him and his wife, and they're in their 70s or 80s at this point. I want to say early 80s, but maybe it was late 70s. Was lost their personal monies, though he was still a lecturer and a teacher. But the first thing they said, the first statement they made was, we've seen worse. Which, of course, is referring to the fact that he had to march in death camps and, lost his entire family, his father and sister and mother, all during that Holocaust. And then he had to go walk the route to Russia, the death camp walks. And his father died. And, it's just like, he barely survived and lived. But, to him, yes, this was horrific and unforgivable, but at the same time, it's like he had already seen so much worse that a human being can do to another human being, that he had that kind of belief system that more resilient, because it's built on actual live experience of suffering and overcoming. And Janine Roth, she's often on Oprah. I want to say she does financial type, self-helpy type books, but I can't remember exactly. But she and her husband also lost their entire life savings. And she also had a kind of interesting attitude where she said she really had to focus on what they still had. Obviously they still had their health, they still had their family members, they still had, they were still active. I don't know if they were working full time. You know what I mean? They had successful careers. So they had a history of success. So she said, I literally could not, if I focused on what I lost, I would never get out of bed. I had to make myself just grateful for every little thing, like, my hot coffee in the morning, or like, the birds in the tree, like anything that was in the present tense. And I couldn't veer off that, or I would fall apart. And it's good advice. And I really feel like when I listened to that podcast and her saying that, I really feel like I understood it so much, because I 100% feel I would never want to have had my brain injury from the assault, or have gone through that experience with the robbery and be disabled now, which I am, and lose, my professional career that I did from losing skills I used to have permanently. But I will say, like, it's been 8 years, like, there really is nothing I fear that much, because I already had to learn how to read again. I've already had to almost have lost my mind, like my common sense, my ability to function. I've already been at a ground zero where I was ashamed of who I had become. Physically I was ashamed, mentally, and I clawed my way out of that. With God's grace, I never would have gotten out of that if it had just been people. I did rely on people, but it was definitely like, there was just so much I could never tell other people. I could just never share some of the horrific feelings I had, and the disappointment and the pressure I put on myself, and the sense of failure, and just the misery of losing who you are, your identity, and having such essential things like reading and writing stripped from you when that's your whole focus of your whole adult professional life. And then what you like to do most in your leisure time, have all that taken away, or at least mutilated to the point where it's just not, I'll never be what I was ever. Like, in some weird way, it is a source of power that I've been through so much in my life, so much. And I talk about it in all my other videos. And I still always go back to the brain injury as the definitive thing that has happened to me that taught me true autonomy and the ability to enjoy, like she's talking about, enjoy just being alive, enjoy just being grateful for all the little stuff. Like, that's so true. Like, if you go through a disease or disability, like, especially something that's, almost killed you or maimed you in some horrific way, it's like, I don't think you ever come back untouched, or unless you're just completely not in tune with yourself. You just, how you see the world is forever changed. And even though there's pessimism and, for me personally, it was just a lot of self-blame and a lot of self-criticism and a lot of not understanding, questioning God, even though that God had nothing to do with it. But, like, why this, of all the things, why this, what, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to have a life now. I don't understand. My compass is broken. I don't get it. But just the hard work, the hard times, the being at ground zero and being completely leveled, and then over the years, little by little, getting some of that back over time. And at least getting to the point where nobody notices, nobody knows I'm disabled at all by looking at me or even being around me. Like, it's completely hidden. And it was not that way at all for at least the first 2 years, for sure. It was very obvious. Disturbing. It was not hidden. And that all had to be rebuilt. And, just to be able to know that I was able with so much, this is like a ton of rehab, a ton of physical therapy, and just working with so many different specialists for so long, so I could finally do it on my own. That I knew I can probably handle whatever, I won't like it. I will probably be, deeply unhappy about another bad thing that would happen. But I have way more confidence that I can handle it and persevere, and, again, with God's support and continual, consistently always being there. I'm never alone. That, a seed can grow again. I know that. Where I don't feel like, when I was like the 2 rapes I'd experienced, or like with my mom, and like the schizophrenia and child abuse and all that, like and my drug addiction in my early 20s, which was very violently graphic. It's extreme. All those things did build resilience in me, but it was never like the brain injury. And I guess because I had a much smaller, I mean, that's smaller, but I had a less serious brain injury when I was 4 from my mom. Hitting me with some kind of object. And I'd already had, so even then, it's like I was such a little kid, I don't remember a lot. I remember some of the bad parts, but I don't remember so much the daily grind trying to get to center. But it was like nothing ever was as truly grounding, so that sounds insane, than the brain injury I had from the assault, just because, not that I would ever want to have that, just because it truly showed me that literally you can come back from fucking anything and you won't be the same person. You definitely won't be the same person, but you can be somebody worthwhile again, even if you spent years believing it's over, like you're not gonna even be a fraction of what you were. And you have all these doctors and people telling you that's true, you're not. Like, this is all the evidence right here. It's not gonna work. Beating a dead horse, was an epic fail. But I know from experience that's not true, so I do understand what they're talking about. Does that mean that people want to be going around being exploited by these people? Have like the problem with these people who are these con artists is like they literally are just interested in, their focus is not the focus of what I would think the average person's focus would be. Their focus is more on maintaining their image, status, money, making an impression, popularity, what other people think of them, external validation to the utmost extreme. And they have everybody should have high goals, but some of their aspirations are outrageous. Like it's like, because none of these people are like struggling, poor, they're not they're not with 4 kids on food stamps. You know what I'm saying? Like, none of these people are like at a point where they're trying to get more money to make it or get out of horrible circumstances. All of them are already very wealthy and successful already. So the question is, what in them makes them have that need that they, it's antisocial personality disorder, yes. Is it narcissism, either malignant or grandiose? Yes. Is it, they might have a personality disorder? More than likely possible. Do they have maybe something with their frontal lobe where they don't have the expansion of the critical thinking, or their amygdala with empathy, or there's just an incredible lack of care for other people, and yet they're putting themselves as the masters of these enterprises that are supposed to help people and make their lives even better. Like, healthcare, there's no other trust that could be broken probably that's as extreme as your bodily health. Like I said, that's like a life and death situation. Like, that is, if you're sick, severely ill, you can't do anything. It doesn't matter if you have amazing kids, or you have, a life with people you care about, or, you have a career you like, or like, hobbies you're good at that you get something out of, or even like, you like to go to church and like, pray or do stuff, and go to mass. I mean, all that stuff that you do, like if you are violently sick, incapacitated because of your health, like you're not going to be doing anything. Like, I know as I watched my dad die of pancreatic cancer, like if you have some kind of very bad disease, like I'm sorry, you're not going to be, you're not going to be participating in any of that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, what she did is really such a violation, which is the oath of, medicine, is that do no harm. It's like, it's so violating. And then talking about charities, Holocaust charities, this other guy was going to talk about Tom Girardi, who was actually the lawyer that Aaron Brockovich was based on, who made those huge wins for the underdogs. He was famous for that. And then he turns around and ends up taking money from, like, I'm going to say it wrong, like some international horrific plane crashes where there were widows and children, and the monies to them, and to burn victims from a huge chemical disaster where people's houses just blew up, and like, people were burned and majority of their body, and their loved ones were killed. Like, this guy who has this reputation of being, the one for the underdog, who has built his whole career on helping others, and everybody admires him for that, as being altruistic. At some point, he sells out, and he has this, 30-year younger wife who's very into money, and on like what Beverly Hills Housewives or whatever. I'm not pointing her out in any way. It's like, I don't even know, like, her involvement in it has never really fully been proven. But the point is that something happened on the way with these people where it's like, whatever they were about, I mean, you have to really be out there on a branch far, far, far out, on a moral branch, to be bankrupting and destroying, millions and millions of dollars of money for Holocaust. What I mean? Like what? Charities, it's like, you can't get much lower than stealing money, for your lavish lifestyle from Holocaust. I mean, legacies of their families, generations, like trying to keep that alive. It's like, it just doesn't, there's nothing worse, and like all these older people who it was like they're finally in their golden years, and they finally have set up all this money set up for their lifetime of work and labor, so they can leave money to their children and grandchildren, and then have some little nest egg to live on that they rightfully deserve, when they can't make a living like they used to, and like they've waited for this time, and it's like it's just snatched away. And for what? So somebody could, instead of having a $1 million yacht, they can have like a $20 million yacht. It's like, it doesn't even make any sense. It's like the silly crap that these people were spending money on. A lot of times they spend it on like art collections, like having like original Picassos, and they had these massive art collections. There's this one guy, was a lawyer, Scott Rothstein. No, it wasn't him. Matt Dreyer. That's who it is. Mark Dreyer. High-profile New York attorney sentenced to 20 years for orchestrating a massive 700 million plus fraud. He sold fake promissory notes to hedge funds. Oh yeah, and then he went around and convinced, it's like, I'm insane. He actually like pretended to be investors that different people to like get people to cover more of his debt. And he posed as people. He posted some of his clients in order to, I don't know, it's just crazy. And like I said, this is a man who already was wealthy. Now he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and he's disgraced his whole family. And then the thing I was going to say about Madoff is when he just wrote that one line, that short, simple sentence, asking one of his sons, sorry. He then proceeded to write an 8-page letter, handwritten letter, to, I don't know if it was somebody who was doing a biography of him or some kind of somebody who was writing something about his legacy and who he was. And it's like, he writes this guy like 8 pages, because he's so worried about his image and how he appears and looks to other people. Like, that's more important than his own children, like, having a relief of an explanation, So, they really are into, like, a protection of status. They won't admit failure at any point, even when things are really going wrong. It's like an increased, like, foot on the pedal to the metal to go double hard on the cover up, or they don't escalate in terms of trying to fix. There's not an escalation of energy to fix, confront, figure out the problem. It's more like, okay, the self-justification. Sometimes they feel like the victims because people have such animosity towards them. But it's just, like I said, more than anything, it's a lack of caring how their actions affect anybody else. Even when they're using their funds, their livelihood, on a false pretense, It's like they feel entitled to that money almost because they feel like they know how to manage it better. It's just it's hard to wrap my mind around. I'm not the best person to try to figure that shit out. The only way I could understand it is just think kind of like with the stuff with my biological mom and the mental illness and like how much massive damage was done in our family, like, because it's like I got adopted out of that by my mom's parents, and I thought when they adopted me out of that at 5, like, I would be safe. I thought I would, yes, I would not get to see my parents hardly at all ever again. I didn't want to see my mom ever again, but my dad, I sure did want to see him. But it's like at that time, I believed that I had been rescued, and that even though by 5, like, horrible things had already happened to me, unforgivable things, and I still was a happy child. I still wasn't doom and gloom. I was appropriately depressed about the things that had gone wrong. But I had hope for our future. I believed in the good of my family who had jumped in to make me have a better life, and I believed that was going to be the case. And then when I found out that that was not going to be the case, that they were going to continue making me visit my mom, and she was going to continue to be violent. She was going to continue to beat me and them at times. And that there was going to be no protection. There was going to be no common sense. There was going to be no safety. That I was going to be purposely put in the way of, what I felt was like putting me in a room with like a rabid dog, like this woman could not stand me. And it's just like, I felt so, like, all the pressure felt like on me, like, I'm going to have to figure this out. I'm going to have to fix this. I'm going to have to come up with a solution. Like, I'm going to have to come up with an alternative method of saving myself. Like, no one's going to help me. And in fact, they're going to put me in dangerous way again and again and again, because they refuse to accept what's happening with my mom. Like, my grandmother would literally rather be hit by my mom and treated like a piece of garbage than accept the fact that my mom was truly, there was not going to be a cure. She was never going to be who she was ever again. Like, it was never going to happen. It was always going to be like this. And my grandmother just insisted, because it was her only daughter, that was not the case. That, this visit, this time she saw me. My grandmother was obsessed with us. The mother instinct would come out of my mom, and she would be like, become this living person again. It's like, she's paranoid schizophrenic. She's highly violent. Like, she's already tried to kill me once. Like, she's not going to, like, come out of it and be like, oh my God, the love of my child has made me, like, well. It's like, that is, like, delusional. That's more delusional than my mom. But why am I bringing this up? Because it's like, I feel like a lot of times in these systems of this, some of this financial deception is just like, the bounds of what people are thinking is going to happen are just ludicrous. Like, it is just a script that's going to hell in a handbasket for everybody. Like, the perpetrators and the victims. Like, everyone's going down, It's going to be an epic destruction of everybody. And, like, there's nothing anybody, well, there were things in place people could have done. It's just, at that point, everyone is just, what I'm trying to say is, people just get hooked on the Kool-Aid. They get hooked on the delusion. They get hooked on not having to face reality. And, of course, nobody wants to face things about their own failures or see themselves in a light that's, makes you feel like you can't live with yourself. Nobody wants that. But it's like, just the amazing distance between what's real, what's really happening, and what is in people's perception of what's happening. There's just such a huge disconnect. And it just seems like, how does this go on so long? Which is exactly what I would say in my own family growing up. Like, how is this going on so long? Like, how is this possible? We're not even at a couple of years here. We're taking decades. It's the same with these con artists and these scams. It's like, how is this person getting away with this for 20 years? I mean, my God. Nobody's catching these as anything. This is insane, So, and it's always not until, like, the housing crisis happens and, like, Wall Street's, like, crashing, that, like, there's finally, truth is finally being told, and, like, everyone's putting on their, taking off their 3D glasses and seeing what's really happening, and it's like, hey, it's a little disturbing. It's disturbing that people can be so out of touch with what is happening in, like, key areas of their life that are critical for their not just surviving as even but thriving as a person, you know, and like having a life that has meaning and any kind of joy or peace, you know, because it's like if you are totally broke and now you're you know, older and you can't produce the same kind of, or people aren't going to, you know, hire you for that kind of positions you used to have. It's like, what exactly are you supposed to do? You know, like you're screwed. And it's like, it's just crazy that these things got to that point. Now, I'll probably just go on about one more case because I'm already at time, but Melissa Caddick is a piece of work. She's an Australian financial advisor. Crazily was using a friend's financial advisor certification or whatever license. It's like, how is this happening? But she ended up making millions of dollars by, you know, she just had this amazing wardrobe and she had all these contacts and she just knew all the right things to say, and she taking everybody's money and investment. But the creepy thing about her, and she's living this lavish lifestyle, which is making and like when people are living rich, everybody thinks, oh, they're very wealthy. You know, they're not thinking, oh, they're very wealthy on money they've taken from other people. You know, they assume it's theirs, right? So it's like everybody trusts them as somebody to use as an investor because clearly whatever they're doing with their money is definitely working. You know, they're living the high life. And like that one guy I was talking about, the lawyer, the second lawyer, I mean, he was asked, like, why did you think you could get away with this? Like, what on earth, you know, how long did you think you could keep this going? And he was just like, you know, I'd already been living in a $11 million condo or whatever and had this fully staffed yacht, you know, and throwing, you know, he had already been living this high life for so long that it was just like, it seemed like it would never, you know, it seemed like he would get away with it because he already had been for so long. And they just, with the narcissistic personality or the antisocial personality, whatever, sociopath, psychopath, any of these pathologies, there is this delusion of grandeur. There is this sort of intense, and people who have psychosis have this too. They believe, you know, when they believe they're a prophet or they believe that they're, you know, the voice of, you know, some higher being, you know, like they believe all these things, all these cult members, they believe truly that they are more, really what it is it's superiority. They believe they're smarter than everybody. They think everybody else is on a lower level than them. They're of a higher intelligence. They believe that if problems or things come up where people are going to find out, that they are simply ahead of it. You know, like they will be able to outwit everybody. Like they believe their own lies more than anybody. And then also a lot of it is a lot of these victims are so ashamed and blame themselves and hate themselves so much for being you know, naive, or, you know, they feel they're stupid. They feel like they should have seen the red flags. They feel like, how could they let this happen? You know, like they're intelligent people. So, but all that shame and fear of being seen as somebody who would be gullible or be naive or be somebody someone else would be easily scam them. That feeds into why it lasts so long, because it's a fear of visibility. These people do not want to be outed. They don't want to open the newspaper and see their names as victims of huge financial losses, because, you know, with the Madoff scandal, everybody was like, oh, well, that just happened to people who were already wealthy, you know, like that's their own fault for being greedy. You know, the things people say are so rude, and like they just put people in boxes and just, you know, like people say anything just to pull the projection of like their own fear of anything random like that happening to them. They'll just rip apart someone else, you know, and it's like, okay, whatever. You know, these people legitimately were taken in by somebody who, yes, made them false promises, but somebody who was deeply valued and esteemed by everybody around them. You know, like it's easier to be fooled by somebody who everybody is admiring and everybody's telling you, you know, wow, if you're allowed to be part of, you know, he'll call you back and bring you into his little financial club or whatever. You're so lucky. Like everybody's asking to be part of that, and like he's hardly taking anybody. You know, it's just like, what I'm trying to say is it all feeds into it. It all just, and that's how some of these things keep going on. Tom Gagliardi, the one with the Aaron Brockovich story, he ended up in a nursing home, and of course all his assets were liquidated, and you know he'll be tied up in legal whatever forever. Melissa Caddick's dead. When she got found out, and they raided her house, and the horrible thing about her is she stole all the money from her parents' best friends, like her best friends. Like, I mean, she was ruthless in her inner circle to a point that's actually disturbing. So, you know, she tried to flee, and then you know, they say she jumped off one of those cliffs. Like where she lived was a very full of cliffs and stuff. Sort of affluent community by this natural beach with these high cliffs, and later her foot was found just in a designer sneaker or something, just that washed up on shore, but nothing else. So it's like, that's it. That's all anybody knows. But like, you know, and her husband and son, like, I mean, her husband was way younger than her, and she had spent a ton of money on like his whatever music career or whatever, and you know, her poor son, I think, was under 10, but it's like she never tried to contact her son again, so that's why people think she was truly deceased, and it wasn't just like a red herring to throw people off and think she was dead. Anyway, let's see who else I want to talk about. Well, I think Melissa was the last one I was going to talk about. I'll go over, like I said, I mean, like I wanted, when I was studying all this stuff, I wanted to find something that would point to why these people did what they did. Like what is really going on. But the truth of the matter is, it's just garden variety narcissism, sociopathy, possible anti-personality. Well, that's not possible. It's probably legitimately true. But it's like, what I'm trying to say is, I thought I would find, like I was trying to find something extra, because these are such big crimes, that there'd be like something like really massive about their brains or their minds or like their personalities that would just really be like, you know, like be able to point to that and say, this is why they did this. But unfortunately, it's like, it's just the same old garden variety stuff that, you know, all the psychology platforms are talking about. It's the same old categories, you know. I guess, like, drug addicts can really do horrific things for drugs, like people of narcissism can do horrific things for attention and to feel validated. And, it's like codependent people trying to people please and, keep everybody attached to them because they need them, like horrible things can happen from that too. Like all of these things that it's like, I guess anything out of balance, anything that's taken to the extreme on any of these things. And when you have untreated conditions where no one's looking at anything, because even if you're on top of your whatever your mental illness is, and you're doing the medication, you're doing exercise, you're doing like, therapies or whatever. Like I've gotten kind of negative about therapy because I've tried to do so much EMDR about my mom over the years. I'm sick and over it. I'm like, if I'm 55 years old and I still am like messed up from my biological mom, it's just like, that is sad. It's like, that is sad. I mean, I've been going to therapy since I was 15. I'm seriously still having problems having relationships with people over this shit. Like, it's disturbing. It's like, I feel like, how many advanced degrees do I have to get so that I can like have a better attachment style? Like, what the hell? I don't know, but it's like sometimes I just think therapy is, it's important. Is it the end all be all? I wish it was. But sometimes I just think you're sitting around talking about the same, you're just dragging it all up, judging it all up, swimming around in it. I don't know. That's why I'm more into like prayer, spirituality, and, just having a deeper walk with God. And like, I think it's spiritual now. I have a passion for, what psychology can do, what healing can do. But at the same time, like, the types of healing I believe in now is like the true transformative things it's changed, I've gotten disillusioned, there's just sometimes it's just it's hard to believe how ingrained our own habits and I don't know, our the way we see the world, our own perception. It's a little scary how much they can be like ingrained in us, whether we don't want that anymore. Like, we want to change. And it's like, sometimes it's just like, is change truly, like, I believe in change, but it's like, sometimes it feels like there's a limit to change, and it's like, you want to go beyond the perimeter, and it's like you do the work, and then it's just, you get dragged back to what's familiar, and then it's like, just keep this stupid dance. Like, I'm sick and tired of it, like, I do not want to live the second half of my life like I lived the first half of my life. I will promise you that. I'm not interested. Not. Alright, well, I'm going to end this video. And, Anna Delvey. That crazy German heiress who, like, went to New York City and pretended like she was a New York debutante, and she lived in all the richest hotels and took private jets, like $36,000 trips, and she didn't have the money. She was lying that she was a billionaire's daughter. or waiting for an inheritance. Like, it was all fake. She's in prison now. Like, I want to do an episode on her because she's a peach. She's really one because she's just flat out like, yeah, I have a few regrets, but overall, I probably wouldn't do that much different. And I think I deserve a second chance. I mean, it's just like, she's a real piece of work. She's something. We'll definitely have to do an episode on her. So, all right. That's it.